Good evening. This is your host, Lonnie Clark, with the Age of Fission radio show. I want to thank you for joining us. You can find this show on Spreaker, SPREAKER.com. Just type in Lonnie Clark or the Age of Fission radio show, and you should be able to find it. It will post up on a bunch of different radio venues, and it also posts up on my YouTube channel, which is Nutzforart, Nutzforart. And I want to thank you for paying attention to this whole nuclear industry thing, because most people have just been basically brainwashed and trained to just ignore it. So I also want to give you a bit of a warning on my YouTube channel. I swear. I talk about other things other than, I'm beginning to do that. I haven't very much in the past, but I am going to be doing that much more, talking about other things other than nuclear contamination, which has been the primary focus for me since 2012. May 5th, 2012, I had a nightmare about Hanford that I saw the whole sky orange, and I was just freaked out thinking that maybe they had a meltdown up at the Columbia Generating Station, and it caused a big fire because I'd heard that could cause a serious problem. And I have since deemed that the proximity factor, that Hanford and the Columbia Generating Station are only 12 miles away from each other. So if there's a mild meltdown at the Columbia Generating Station, within 72 hours, we're likely to have one of the tanks just blow up if nobody can get in there. And we may have a fire that lasts for 100,000 years. I discovered that actually Fukushima was not handled. It wasn't over. That there was actually 3 ongoing nuclear meltdowns, which is still there are. There are 3 still ongoing nuclear meltdowns at Fukushima. Now, if you want to call that Fukushima porn, fear porn, that's your framing. It's not fear porn. I'm not telling people to just go stick their head in this, life is worthless, because life is not worthless. Life is still great. And the one good thing about nuclear contamination is it doesn't kill you right away unless you're really close to it, right? So the people up in Richland have a greater chance of having it affect them directly, or their children more likely, because children are much more susceptible to nuclear contamination. Something going on with their body, autoimmune system, or hole in the heart, schizophrenia. These are things that John Goffman and Arthur Tamplin, when they studied the health effects of ongoing low-level radioactive contamination, there were several things that they said will happen, and it does happen. If you want to call that fear porn, that's up to you what you want to call it. I call it facing reality. It's not fear porn. And I do want to, this kind of just annoyed me. I just discovered through one of my comments, some guy made a comment which was reported actually as harassment, that I'm doing fear porn by doing this show, and that I'm making money. I'm not making money. I don't monetize these videos. I don't talk about Fukushima so that I can get people to generate money and give me money. That's not the point of it. The point is so that we can actually, it's kind of like when I talk to people about their general health, staying off chemicals and GMOs. It's exactly the same thing. The same reason I talk about geoengineering, because these are things that are harming us. We went through an industrial revolution and went hog wild on the industrial and completely ignored the safety and the health effects on the human species. And while I am 63 years old right now in my life, I probably am the least affected by radioactive contamination at this point on the new ones, although my generation was the first ones to be bombed. So we don't really know. This is all brand new, folks. You can't say it's fear porn. I say it's paying attention. I say it is like, let's make sure we can take care of our health as much as possible. Now, is nuclear a good energy source? Evidently, because it sure lights up a lot of homes and does a lot of things. Do we need to be radiating our food with radioactivity? I don't think so. I think that's as bad as GMOs. Does it help with medical stuff? I don't think so. I don't think you take the poison to cure yourself from the poison, but maybe you do. I mean, that's kind of like what homeopathy does, right? So I don't know. I'm not a scientist type. All I know is that the results of scientific studies shows that, ongoing low-level radioactive contamination is cumulative and it causes harm, and that there are things that we can do to prevent it from taking over our lives and destroying our lives. I think that's reasonable. So that's why I keep doing this, and I have gone back and forth over the last year, I would say, as to why I'm doing this. Like, it certainly hasn't won me friends and influence, and I really don't want to monetize my channel. But really, the reason I do it is I'm compelled to do it. It is a calling that I just can't ignore. I want people to know about it so that they can pay attention. Not that you have to go out and get a Geiger counter, because I went through the whole Geiger counter phase, and I'll tell you what, it's pretty sickening. Like, do we even know what that means? 12 counts per minute, 25 counts per minute, 45 counts per minute, 75 counts per minute. In Fukushima right now, they're counting up 3.2 counts per minute, 1.5 counts per minute. What does that mean? We don't know. We haven't had it long enough to know what it really means. We haven't lived with it for 100 years. So we don't really know. But what we do know is we're changing the atmosphere, just like we know we're changing the atmosphere with geoengineering. It's beyond comprehension that these topics are off the table, that we cannot talk about them, that science is able to be controlled by the corporations that are paying the bills. Instead of allowing science to give these corporations the solid answers, the corporations are telling the scientists, give us the answers we want. That is a recipe for extinction, in my view. And that's how we seem to be proceeding. I don't know if any of you ever go to End Times Prophecy, but it's called Mass Animal Deaths. You can check it out. massanimaldeaths.org, I believe it is. This lady, there's some woman, she's a Christian type, and she adds up, she reports on every single story during the month of all the mass animal deaths. And right now we are losing animals at an unprecedented level. And is it from just nuclear? No. In fact, nuclear is probably the least of it, in my view, because it's a slow killer. That's the thing about nuclear. It's a DNA harmer, unless you're living really right on top of it. So we just need to be aware of it, because we have created this world that is not the world our great-grandparents had. We have an environment now that our great-grandparents did not have, that our grandparents didn't have, that our parents didn't have. We have created a world where we have to pay attention, where we must make an extra effort to keep our bodies healthy. I mean, we're living with the industrial food complex, for goodness sakes. They pump the animals up. They pump the foods up with these hideous chemicals. We have to actually pay more money to eat food that doesn't have chemicals sprayed on it, which is insane. We're paying money. We subsidize money to spray chemicals and GMOs. In fact, today on Senator Chuck Grassley's Instagram page, he posted up a picture of himself eating a GMO soybean. He's like, see, GMOs didn't kill me. No, but they're going to hurt your children. They're DNA killers, just like radioactive contamination. They're DNA killers. So we got to be sensible. We got to not, and this is the sad part, like this cat that's like got me on his list and I need to be afraid of him. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of you, guy. I'm not afraid of being attacked on YouTube. I've been on YouTube for 5 years. You think I haven't been attacked already? Like, whatever. Because you know what? I have the truth on my side. We have facts. I'm not lying. I'm reading Dr. Helen Caldicott's book, which is well researched and annotated. Everything in this book is hard fact. Now, are there people on YouTube fear-mongering? I know of one person that I supported for 3 years who exaggerates the daylights to the point where I don't know what he says is true or what he says is false. Half of what everything he says is filled with an ounce of a grain of truth. But it took me 3 years to figure it out, that he wasn't telling me the truth. And I think that's kind of a lot of people. People don't know what's true and not true. And we want to believe people are telling us the truth. Just like we want to believe that the nuclear industry is telling us the truth. But for goodness sakes, it's not just the nuclear industry. It's our government. The Energy Department wants to abandon radioactive waste. They want to change the rules for cleaning up the Hanford nuclear waste, and it's not just at Hanford. They want to change the how they call high-level nuclear waste. They want to reclassify it as low-level nuclear waste. Because you know why? It's expensive, and they still don't have solutions. And the reason we don't have solutions is they keep not spending money on how to deal with it. They take every shortcut. They lie. They attack people who talk about it. This cat on the YouTubes that sent me that threatening notice, like, you're on my list. Okay. Maybe I should feel honored. I don't know. Like, I'm not attacking the nuclear industry. I'm just talking about how it's being used and neglected. So I want to just share with you really quickly before I get into Dr. Caldicott's book, this is a very important thing. The cleanup, the comment period closed today on January 9th. I know my show is going to post on the 10th, and I've talked to you guys about this before. But, the Department of Energy wants to change how they store a small portion of nuclear waste. I went to a hearing in October, and that's where the guy posted it because I didn't have my camera turned right, so it was like sideways. My first one was sideways. I couldn't figure it out. And no, I'm not a professional photographer. I'm not a professional activist. I'm not any of that stuff. I'm just a regular citizen of the United States. I went to a hearing and I wanted to post it up on YouTube so people would hear what the real scientists say. That was the Department of Energy from Washington, and it was the Department of Ecology. That's what they call themselves, the Ecology. Department of Energy from Oregon, and the United States Department of Energy gave a presentation, and this cat posted up that I was fear-mongering. I was posting up a public hearing. This is how scared the nuclear industry is of people learning the truth. And actually, it's kind of sad. That's why I keep persisting, because I want to change the culture. One of the things I did on my YouTube channel was I read an article. It was a scientific study done in 2012. And I dug it up as a college research paper. I was looking for something else and found this study that couldn't be used, but it was a scientific study done in 2012 that basically said that the International Atomic Energy Agency had never empirically tested their safety culture model that is used at every single nuclear facility on the planet. They had never tested it. And when it did get tested, it had 8 marks of safety. Only one passed by 50%. And that one was that the workers felt that they could tell their employers, that their bosses, that something was wrong. So what does that tell you about the culture of the nuclear industry? So I'm not shocked that they're going to come after me that I'm talking about it. They've had 50, 60 years of harassing and harming people. Look what they've done to Dr. Caldicott. She led 1 million people in New York City to stop the nuclear industry from building over 300 nuclear power facilities in this country. And I guess they're kind of angry about it, I'm going to read a little clip from this article from the Seattle Times in which they're talking about the waste from nuclear. It says, the danger extends beyond Hanford. Once the Energy Department grants itself the authority to redesignate dangerous nuclear material, it can do the same with hundreds of millions of gallons of high-level waste stored at 161 other tanks or simply dumped into the ground at Hanford. It sets a dangerous precedent that will place millions of people at risk, not just downwind and downriver from Hanford, but near facilities in South Carolina, Idaho, and upstate New York, where millions of gallons of high-level waste are stored. Why consider such an unsound plan? Money. By absolving itself of its legal obligation to handle high-level waste safely, the Energy Department expects to save $40 billion, with a B, folks, $40 billion. They're calling it, it's just simply cannot come up with an alternative way to treat it because it is just too expensive or too difficult. Which basically is saying we're shirking our responsibility. Sorry, we created something really terrible and we're just going to leave it there and hope for the best, cross our fingers, oops. And then what they do is their workers, or they get people, they pay people to come after anyone who talks out about it. I don't know whether this guy who's attacking me now is getting paid by the nuclear industry. But do I care? No, because the facts are the facts. I don't know if nuclear energy is good or not, but I do know it creates a byproduct that is highly dangerous and needs to be treated with respect and care and safeguarded. I don't know. Can you tell I'm not a scientist? But I have this intuitive feeling that we'll be able to fix the nuclear waste problem. Maybe call me the eternal optimist, but I have this feeling that if we could just get corporations to actually lean into it, we need to spend $100 billion on the nuclear waste problem. They're complaining about spending $40 billion. We need to lean in, and it needs to be our primary industry. How do we remediate the nuclear waste so that we can use nuclear energy efficiently and for a long time? Because we've got big, long problems going on here. And the way that they've handled it has just created just a mess. A shit show, to be honest. I'm sorry for cussing, but that's all it is. And so they get people to come out and attack, and it's just completely unnecessary. So I am just dumbfounded. And that is why I do this, because I'm dumbfounded. Like, we need to learn how to remediate it, which means we need universal education, and we need to learn how to protect ourselves, which means health benefits. And I'm going to mention a few that I have learned myself. For those of you who don't know how to protect yourself from radioactive contamination, there are things you can do. Dr. Circus, SIRCUS, drcircus.com. You can go to his website. I interviewed him on my radio show on UCY.TV when I was on that radio station. And he basically said a half a teaspoon of baking soda every morning helps your body detox itself from heavy metals. You can take dandelion root tea on a regular basis, or take dandelion root powder every morning, but just drink dandelion root tea. That absorbs the toxins out of your body and allows you to detox. I mean, it's all about us learning how to detox, right? Don't eat chemicals. Don't eat GMOs. Eat a good, clean diet. Stay off of sugar. That's one of the things Dr. Circus talks about. Stay off of processed sugar. It is a cancer magnet. So if you're being exposed to low-level radioactive contamination, which we all are, we're there. We've been bombed. Over 2,000 bombs in World War II. We're there, folks. So we don't have to freak out because we're already there. We just have to know how to keep ourselves healthier. You cut out the sugar, you exercise on a regular basis, be happy. Being happy is very important in terms of not getting diseases. And then, there's just things we're not going to be able to control. DNA damage to our children. The autoimmune deficiency diseases that are passed on in utero to our children. We can't stop that. The diabetes that's going to set in on our youth when they turn 18, 19 years old because of radioactive. We can't change these things, but we can learn to cope with it. And the reason I'm doing this radio show is to free science from corporate control so that we can have the conversation about making us healthier and better. Oh my gosh, it's been 20 minutes. So let me get right to our book because I do want to read our book. I am reading The New Nuclear Danger, Dr. Helen Caldicott, George W. Bush's military-industrial complex, and we are on chapter 9 on page 162. She starts the chapter with 2 quotes. The first one comes from M.W. Grunzy, Grunzy. We enter the 21st century locked in mortal arms race with ourselves. Though the needs for more advanced weaponry are at best unclear, we proceed on the premise that if we build it, they will come. The second quote is from Harry Truman on the Pentagon. It's not right that all those people in one building without a single watchdog. We are in trouble when the generals get that much power. No doubt, dude. Okay, here we go. The title again is The Lockheed Martin Presidency and the Star Wars Administration. So I guess she thinks that's George W. Bush. But it seems to be anybody who occupies the White House. Okay, George W. Bush ascended to the presidency propelled by a Republican-dominated Supreme Court. His cabinet is composed mostly of corporate executives. Among them are Dick Cheney, former CEO of Halliburton Oil, Andrew Card, Chief of Staff, General Motors Vice President, Paul O'Neill, Secretary Treasury of the Secretary, Chair of Alcoa, Don Evans, Secretary of Commerce, former CEO of Tom Brown Inc. Oil Company, Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, former CEO of G.W. Searle and General Instrument, Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor, Chevron Board of Directors. $40 million, the largest amount ever donated, paid for the festivities at the inauguration, including $100,000 each by 168 corporations and individuals. More than 45 corporations wrote 5-digit checks for the events that honored Texans. A news release said that this will be the only inaugural ball where guests can have their picture made with a 2,500-pound Brahman bull or sitting in the cockpit of a fighter jet. The donating corporations include Ford, General Motors, major Washington law firms, Marriott Corporation, Enron, Conoco, Hunt Oil, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Southern Energy Company, American Airlines, Major League Baseball companies, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Philip Morris, U.S. Tobacco, Abbott Drug Laboratories, Bristol-Myers, Squibb, Pfizer, General Electric, AT&T, and Alcoa. The financial security and investment industry contributed over $2 million. Barron's Online wrote, "The Capitol is filling up with pinstripe Chamber of Commerce types attracted by what promises to be the most pro-business, anti-regulatory administration since Ronald Reagan reigned. Bush has packed CEOs and industrial lobbyists on transitions teams that are advising his new cabinet secretaries and agency heads on pressing policy issues and new hires. The advisory team for nominee Gail Norton's Department of Interior is jammed with representatives of energy, mining, and paper companies." Well, that seems to have been the norm now, isn't it? As Steve Weiss from the Center for Responsive Politics observed, the general public, which cannot give these large contributions, does not get access to the next president or his advisors. Money buys you access to the president and those who are shaping the policies. The world's most powerful corporation, one that literally controls the fate of the earth, is Lockheed Martin. As we have seen, This company, together with its smaller military corporate colleagues, is involved in the production of almost every single weapon in Star Wars systems that we have examined. They are up to their necks in corporate donations to both presidential candidates and congressional and Senate candidates on both sides of the politics. Weapons industry political action committees favored the Republicans to Democrats by a margin of 2-1 in contributions. Since 1997, the 4 top missile contractors spent $4 million in PAC contributions and $3 million in soft money contributions. They also spent $18 million in lobbying, which is tax deductible. Lockheed Martin was the top defense contractor for the year 2000, receiving $15.1 billion in taxpayer funds. Boeing was next in line with $12 billion, followed by Raytheon at $6.3 billion. As we know, Lockheed Martin employees sit on the boards of right-wing think tanks such as the Heritage Foundation and the Center for Policy Studies. But now that their man is ensconced in the White House, they are in a position to control domestic and international policies directly. These corporations are determined to build a multi-layered Star Wars systems and to build every weapon they can conceive, whether America needs it or not. Wow. You know what is really shocking is that this explains why they installed Trader Trump to get the Star Wars program going. Not just Anwar and the pipelines. Goodness gracious. Back to the book. If Bush proceeds with the full throttle, all systems green and go Star Wars, instead of the modest, modified $60 billion Clinton system, it would cost the nation $240 billion over the years of construction. While many of the expenditures would technically come under the rubric of defense, as Bush noted in a speech in September 1999 before the Citadel Military College in Charleston, South Carolina, when discussing the need to bolster our unrivaled power. Quote, "I know the best defense can be a strong and swift offense," unquote, effectively offering a rubric for development of any weapon whatsoever. We are heading rapidly towards a state of global disaster. A belligerent and ill-informed president sits in the White House, despite his perceived change of status since September 11, 2001. Doesn't that sound like the guy we have right now? A belligerent and ill-informed president sits in the White House, controlled by his corporate staff intent on extracting as much taxpayer money as they possibly can to build ever more exotic and dangerous weapons. Wow. If that does not describe Trader Trump, I do not know what does. Bush administration appointees are among the most hawkish and extreme in recent memory, and an alarming number of Bush staff people have direct ties to Lockheed Martin. The quartet of Vice President Cheney, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, Secretary of State Colin Powell, and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice are now the most powerful people in the world. Believing as they do that America is the heart of the universe, that U.S. militarism must be used to protect American global business interests, that Russia is not to be trusted, and that China may need provoking into a new Cold War arms race, they have embarked America upon a dangerous 4-year journey. Oh my gosh. They have continued that journey. It's not just 4 years. This is exactly what Trader Trump is doing. A new Cold War arms race with China. This is just unbelievable. It's very interesting to read a book that is, what is it now? 12, well, it's written in 2002. I guess it's 17 years old. Back to the book. Vice President Cheney, a de facto leader of a somewhat ceremonial president, to quote the Guardian journalist Martin Kettle, now occupies a position of great influence orchestrating as he does the appointment of cabinet members and directing the activities of the new president. As noted earlier, the vice president's wife, Lynn Cheney, is a former board member of Lockheed Martin. Donald Rumsfeld, a former Republican congressman, former NATO ambassador, and former Secretary of Defense, maintains intimate ties to missile defense advocates and anti-arms control proponents, and he is closely associated with Frank Gaffney's Center for Security Policy, the de facto nerve center for the Star Wars lobby, as noted in Chapter 4. Rumsfeld also serves on the board of Empower America, which ran pro-Star Wars radio ads against an incumbent Nevada Democrat during the 1998 congressional elections. His contrived Rumsfeld report of 1998 warned that America would be threatened by North Korean missiles within the next 5 years, although CIA estimates had placed that projected time frame to 10 to 15 years. This assuming that peacekeeping efforts to unite the Koreas and bring North Korea into the community of nations have failed. And although the U.S. intelligence analyst Robert Walpole said in testimony before Congress, the least likely way for a foreign nation would deliver a nuclear weapon of mass destruction is a ballistic missile because it has a return address. On September 11, 2001, U.S. civilian planes were used as effective ballistic missiles. Shortly before his appointment as Secretary of Defense, Rumsfeld headed another Pentagon commission that unveiled a report in January 2001 warning that America could face a space Pearl Harbor. It advocated tighter security for American space programs and called for the appointment of an Undersecretary of Defense for Space, Intelligence, and Information. It also called for an increased military spending, estimating the cost to replace obsolete military satellites in the next decade to $50 billion. Belligerent in tone, it said that the president should, quote, have an option to deploy weapons in space to deter threats to, and if necessary, defend against attacks on U.S. interests, unquote. At his Senate confirmation hearings, Rumsfeld referred to the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the cornerstone of nuclear arms control, as, quote, ancient history, unquote. He also questioned whether the U.S. could maintain its nuclear arsenal without nuclear testing. This testimony was supported by Senator Jesse Helms, head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, when he said that, quote, the United States is no longer bound by the ABM Treaty. That treaty expired when our treaty partner, the Soviet Union, ceased to exist, unquote. Wow. Helms went on to say, quote, personally, I do not think that a new kind of ABM treaty can be negotiated with Russia that would permit the kind of defenses that America needs and must have. Helms had already antagonized Russia, calling the country an active proliferator because of the transfer of sensitive technology to hostile states like Iran and North Korea. Russia's foreign minister accused Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary of Defense Wolfowitz of behaving like Cold War warriors who were trapped in a time warp. Rumsfeld is a forceful player who generally has had his way against the most powerful opponents. As Gerald Ford's Secretary of Defense, he outmaneuvered Secretary of State Kissinger when Kissinger was in Moscow in the last-minute attempts to coax a SALT II arms control agreement with the Soviets. Behind Kissinger's back, Rumsfeld convened a meeting with the National Security Council, backed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. After 2 hours of discussion, the Pentagon withdrew its support of SALT II. Rumsfeld was traveling and did not attend the meeting. Ford was furious, and SALT II became obsolete for the presidency. Kissinger calls him the most ruthless man he has ever known. Rumsfeld's former colleagues described him as a highly organized, highly political personality and a master bureaucrat. His outreach and influence is pervasive. Since 1992, he has been a member of the board of directors of the Tribune Company, which it boasts in its publicity statements is, quote, television, radio, newspaper, and internet, nearly reaching 80% of the American households every day, unquote. And you know what? I bet you he's still there. Let me see where we're at with time. Hold on just one second. I know I haven't read very much, but I also know that we have a limit time here. Okay. Back to the book about old Donnie Rumsfeld. Colin Powell, the new Secretary of State, is an interesting enigma. Basically a company man, he worked his way up through the ranks of the bureaucracy, eventually becoming the first African American to be appointed chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and subsequently the first African American Secretary of State. However, he failed to protest the overt discrimination against blacks in Florida's vote rigging, which gave Bush the presidency. As an advisor in Vietnam during 1962 and 63, unlike some others, he did not protest the destruction of villages and the killing of civilians. He had an early role in the investigation of the My Lai massacre, which he effectively covered up until it was exposed by other more courageous men. He was involved in the Iran-Contra scandal while working with Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger. Wow, I didn't know that. Although a cautious person at heart, he was deeply involved in, and indeed responsible for, several military operations that flouted the international rule of law. In 1989, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he oversaw the invasion of Panama, when an estimated 300 civilians were killed and buried by the U.S. military in secret graves. 3,000 more were seriously injured. America instigated this operation to capture Manuel Noriega, a man put in office by the CIA, but who had ceased to please the American elite. In his book, Just Cause, Powell enunciated his doctrine, quote, use all the force necessary and do not apologize for going in big if that's what it takes, unquote. Powell believes that American military force should only be used in overwhelming strength to achieve well-defined strategic interests, meaning that peacekeeping operations are not acceptable. He became a hero of Desert Storm when he first warned the Iraqi army that, quote, we are going to cut it off, and then we are going to kill it. Ugh. Did he know that uranium weapons were being used in that operation? If so, did he understand the medical implications of that operation so clearly described in the military literature? If he did, he violated the fundamental principles of war. Innocent civilians are now threatened for the rest of time with malignancies and damaged gene pool. Powell describes Russia and China as countries that the U.S. would attempt to work with, quote, not as potential enemies or adversaries, but not yet as strategic partners, unquote. By buying into this philosophy, he leaves the door open for more radical members of the administration to have their way. During his confirmation hearings, Powell said that the Bush administration would move full speed ahead with a nationwide missile defense, arguing that it was essential to build a complete strategic. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I can't turn the page. A complete strategic framework, including defensive as well as offensive weapons. Taking the Rumsfeld line on the ABM treaty, he said, the framework that treaty was designed for was a framework that really isn't relevant now. We are moving forward with the capacity to develop a missile defense system. And the only way we can eventually move forward is to see the ABM treaty modified or eliminated or changed in some fundamental way. When Senator Joseph Biden and Lincoln Chafee said that the Allies were skeptical about the NMD project, he brushed aside their concerns. Quote, "When people see something new come along, they are terrified. But if it is the right thing to do, you do it anyways. In the end of the day, the world will benefit," unquote, he said. That's kind of how I feel about this radio show. Powell, however, said that it was necessary to walk out of the ABM treaty. He would consult with the Russians and the Allies. And in 1998, he joined the other Joint Chiefs of Staff by supporting the ratifications of the CTBT. Condoleezza Rice is at heart a right-wing ideologue who is dismissive of other countries. While having no direct Lockheed Martin connection, she fits in well with the White House ideology. She said that the trouble with Israel is that it is so small and that Cuba is the roadkill of history. Strongly opposing the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, that's what the CTBT is, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, she wrote in Foreign Affairs, since 1992, the United States has refrained unilaterally from testing nuclear weapons. It is an example to the rest of the world, yet does not tie its own hands in perpetuity if testing becomes necessary again. But in pursuit of a norm against the acquisition of nuclear weapons, the United States signed a treaty that was not verifiable, did not deal with the threat of development of nuclear weapons by rogue states, and threatened the reliability of nuclear stockpiles. Legitimate congressional concerns about the substance of the treaty were ignored during negotiations, unquote. Other appointees mirror the corporate presidency. As noted, Bruce Jackson, Vice President of the Corporate Strategy and Development of Lockheed Martin, volunteered to be the overall chairman of the Bush Foreign Policy Platform Committee at the Republican Convention, and it was he who wrote the Republican Party's foreign policy platform. Wow. Stephen J. Hadley, a partner in the Washington-based law firm Shea and Gardner, which represents Lockheed Martin, has been appointed Deputy Director to the National Security Council, working in the White House as Condoleezza Rice's Chief Deputy. Oh my God. An enthusiastic advocate of Star Wars, he is Secretary of the Committee to Expand NATO and is also a member of the National Security Council staff of President Bush I. Hadley also belongs to an 8-member foreign policy team formed during the Bush campaign, nicknamed the Vulcans after the statue representing the Roman god of fire and metalwork, commemorating the steel-making history of Birmingham, Alabama, Condoleezza Rice's hometown. Composed mostly of Hawks, the group includes Rice and Hadley, and also Richard Armitage, Reagan's former Assistant Secretary of Defense, Robert Blackwell, a member of the Bush the First National Security Council, Dov Zakheim, Reagan's former Undersecretary of Defense, Robert Zoellick, former Undersecretary of Defense for Bush, and Richard Pearl, a man nicknamed the Prince of Darkness by his Pentagon colleagues during the Reagan administration when he was Undersecretary of Defense. Another who is directing the Bush presidency towards a new Cold War stance is Paul Wolfowitz, who headed the Paul Neitz Center for International Studies. Wolfowitz epitomizes the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party Cold War warriors. They still hate Russia, but are looking to China to fill the role of a new American threat on a global scale until terrorist activity recently took center stage. Wolfowitz can take credit for the recent expansion of NATO. He authored a recent memorandum for the Pentagon, which leaked to the New York Times in 1992. warning that Yeltsin's Russia posed a grave potential threat to U.S. interests, and he advocated an all-out U.S.-led NATO war against Russia if it threatened the security of the newly independent Baltic Republic. Although Russia did no such thing, Wolfowitz was installed as a neoconservative hero, and Clinton, ever compliant, expanded NATO into Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Hungary, much to Russia's discomfort and rage. Now that the Cold War is over, NATO has no tangible use, yet it continues to exist and is getting bigger. If Russia had been invited to become part of the NATO alliance, the act would have diffused any Cold War tensions that remained in Europe. Wolfowitz and his acolytes believe that America must maintain its position in global superpower. No regional powers, such as Russia or China, must be allowed to develop, and American values and interests must reign supreme. Richard Pearl, who said on March 15, 1983, the fact that the nuclear winter that would wipe out all life on Earth is all the more reason to continue President Reagan's weapons buildup, is a friend of Wolfowitz. Pearl is a hard-line ally of Israel, believing that there is no difference between the interests of these two countries. In 1996, he was simultaneously advisor to Dole's presidential bid and to Netanyahu's election campaign in Israel. During the Reagan days, he often accused Secretary of State George Shultz of being too soft on Cuba, the Chinese, North Koreans, the Soviets, and Arabs. Robert Zoellick, an ally of Wolfowitz and Pearl, was White House Deputy Chief of Staff to Bush I. He supports NATO enlargement, uncritically supports Israel, and he regards Russia as an inherent adversary, not to be trusted or treated as a friend. Oh, here we go with this guy. Listen to this, folks. Wow. John Bolton, Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, Non-Proliferation and International Security, is described by Senator Jesse Helms as, quote, one of the best and wisest, unquote, nominations that Bush made for his senior foreign policy position. Bolton is the kind of man with whom I would want to stand at Armageddon, for what the Bible describes as the final battle between good and evil in this world, Helms said at an American Enterprise Institute event. At Bolton's Senate confirmation hearing, Helms said, Bolton, I want you to take that ABM treaty and dump it in the same place we dumped our ABM co-signer, the Soviet Union, on an ash heap of history. Bolton believes that the CTBT, which is the, what do we call that? The Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Bolton believes that the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty is dead and that Taiwan should have official diplomatic recognition separate from China, that the U.S. should stop paying dues to the United Nations, and that the U.S. should be indifferent as to whether it has a normal diplomatic relations with North Korea. With Bolton in control, not only will the ABM and CTB treaties be imperiled, but so will all the other arms control treaties, which of each took years to negotiate. Although he is currently enjoying record-breaking approval ratings in America, among the other 95% of the world's population, there is a global fear of George W. Bush and his appointees. This really begins to sound like not much has changed since 2002, has it? Hold on, I want to see how much time we have. Okay, we have about 10 minutes. I'm going to keep reading. Man, this really blows me away. These are quotes from, this is Nick Cohen, London Observer. To describe Star Wars as criminally insane is to slander reputable psychopaths. It is inspired by the delusion that America can achieve absolute dominance, that she can fight without making casualties, forget about deterrence and detonate nuclear weapons, secure in the knowledge that her defensive missiles will shoot down any warheads launched in retaliation. Here's another quote. This is in The Guardian by Polly Toynbee. The richer, stronger, and more globally accountable American becomes, the more self-centered its politics grows. The end of the Cold War should have brought great psychological dividends. Generous in global victory, free of paranoia, and with wealth beyond imagining. Here at last was its chance to become what was always believed itself to be, the brave, the beautiful, the free, and so on. The high-flown rhetoric of these conventions is echoed in every high school valedictory speech, in every rotary and church, pledging allegiance to a constitution that has lost any vision of society beyond the pursuit of happiness. God's chosen people, uniquely blessed, nurture a self-image almost as deranged in its profound self-delusion as the old Soviet Union. The most advanced, knowledgeable, educated, psychoanalyzed, therapized nation on earth knows nothing of itself, irony-free and blind to the world around it. Wow. I just can't keep, I'm just blown away by this chapter. It's as if we have not changed. It's just the people, the psychopaths have changed, the ones in government, that's all. Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet president who more than any other president on earth helped to bring the Cold War to an end, wrote a letter. Oh man, I'm having trouble changing pages. Wrote a letter to who? President Bush, after the Supreme Court made him president. He wrote, I hope, Mr. Bush, as the new American president, that you will give up any illusion that the 21st century can or even should be the American century. Globalization is a given, but American globalization would be a mistake. For 10 years, U.S. foreign policy has been formulated as if it were the policy of a victor in war, the Cold War. But at the highest reaches of U.S. policy making, no one has grasped the fact that this could not be the basis for formulating post-Cold War policy. From the standpoint of the old world, the post-Cold War period ushered in hopes that are now fading. Over the past decade, the United States continued to operate along an ideological track identical to the one followed during the Cold War. The expansion of NATO eastward, the handling of the Yugoslav crisis, the theory and practice of U.S. rearmament, including the utterly extravagant national missile defense system, which is based on the bizarre notion of, quote, rogue nations, unquote. Isn't it amazing that disarmament moved further during the last phase of the Cold War than during the period after its end, unquote? Russia is frightened of Star Wars. Because of the poor state of its weapons, Russia relies on a launch-on-warning policy. All 111 of Russia's operating satellites are on the brink of collapse. More than 70% are past their initial service lives, and 70% of them have military functions. The deteriorating conditions of satellites and early warning radar increases the possibility of false signals, and these conditions are compounded by the erosions of the Russian command and control system, possibly allowing a rogue commander to take control. We cannot assume that Russia has its weapons under strict control. The Bush people should realize that it is extremely unwise to threaten a wounded or inadequate nation, for they may respond in an unpredictable fashion. In November 2000, Putin proposed a massive cut in the level of strategic weapons to 1,000 or less, saying that there should be no pause in nuclear disarmament. He said a 1,500 level could be reached by 2008, but only on the condition that the U.S. does not proceed with missile defense. Russia cannot afford its annual spending of $5.1 billion on defense compared to the U.S.'s expenditure of $310 billion. To this end, Putin also approved a military reform program to cut his 3 million military personnel by 600,000. I think I'm going to stop here. We're at the top of page 173. And for those of you, I know you're listening to my show at 11 o'clock at night in Eugene, Springfield area. If you're not an early riser and don't get that show on KEPW, you can always go to Libya Halevi's website, which is nuclearhotseat.com, and listen to her shows. As I say, you guys put your courage feet on, because you know happiness is resistance. And so put your courage feet on. We really appreciate you tuning in. We'll talk to you guys next week. Take care.
8 minutes and a YouTube video was all it took for me to take action in the fight for Fukushima. If that doesn't prove the power of content, I don't know what will. Hey y'all, it's Dave here from Operation Save the Earth, and this is the Fuku Friday Happy Hour Hangout for January 4th, 2019. I know it sounds hard to believe, but it's true. When the Fukushima nuclear disaster began in March of 2011, I was like a lot of people here in the U.S. I thought, gee, that sounds bad, but Japan's smart. I'm sure they have robots for this kind of thing, and happily forgot all about it. Seriously, but a few months later, I was on Twitter, and one of my trusted content providers posted a video of a mom and a dad in Japan who were just weeks after the disaster began, put out the word that they were worried about the safety of their kids. Wouldn't you be if your government wasn't telling you anything about the risks involved with a triple meltdown that was ongoing in your neighborhood? Parents in Japan learned the hard way that year that they were on their own when it came to assessing what's best to do in the face of this crisis. Stay in your home where your family has lived for generations, or evacuate to a safer area. Some moved only to face discrimination and bullying in other parts of the country. A lot stayed for economic reasons, and today there are 1.9 million people still living in Fukushima Prefecture, along with millions of others living in other radiation-impacted areas of Japan. With the cover-up in place to muffle any kind of blowback against the government or TEPCO and the nuclear power industry, it's little wonder why the outcry from Japanese citizens about how bad things got there in 2011 hasn't reached the world yet to this day. But we're going to change that, aren't we, Fuku Fighters? Click on the link below in the description of this video to hear the voices of real Fukushima parents. Trust me, you do not need to understand Japanese to know what a worried parent looks or sounds like. That is universal. The message that Mr. Nakate has been fighting for in this early days video has been the same ever since, as NGOs have popped up over the years. They're in support of those who need it. It's a testament to the determination in the face of cultural norms to keep those efforts going, and it's our job to lift those voices up so that everyone can hear and understand why the catastrophe at Fukushima is still so relevant today, just as it is for atomic bomb survivors. The scars left by nuclear energy and weaponry far outstrip any supposed benefits that their so-called experts continue to spout about. We can end that cycle of damage today by collectively pledging to stick a fork in the nuclear era once and for all, because if we don't, our kids will have to, so that their kids can grow up healthy and happy in this world, and by then, it may be just too late. We have to get started by taking step 1 of the Operation Save the Earth 4-step plan, because without it, we'll never get to steps 2, 3, and 4, and it's obvious that we must. So what do we got to do, guys? Taking step 1, that's the easiest part of the whole journey, and you can start today by heading over to our website at OperationSaveTheEarth.com. Inform yourself about what's going on at Fukushima for reals, not that fake stuff that you get on the TV, right? So you do that, and then when you're ready for more, then you can sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Just send me an email at info@OperationSaveTheEarth.com, and I'll get you on our mailing list so that you can get that every Monday morning in your inbox. Once you've done that, be sure to follow us at OSTE 8 Minutes on Twitter. That's where you get all the latest Fukushima news of the week, guaranteed. Now, they say that history repeats itself. Well, if 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima are any indication, my question is, when is the next disaster going to take place and where? The World Health Organization says that there's a 50-50 chance by 2050 that is going to happen again. So unless you want to live in an even more radioactive world than you already do right now is the time to do something about it. So, you have your assignment, Fuku Fighters. Let's gather here again next week to see how we did and hopefully celebrate our collective good fortune. So until next time, this is Dave saying peace. Take care till then.